Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Honorable Edward Seaga. Well, here is your chance. A conversation with the leader of the opposition of Jamaica. Don't go anywhere. CaribNation is up next. CaribNation, I'm David Hinds, coming to you from the office of the leader of the opposition of Jamaica, the Honorable Edward Seaga. Our conversation with Mr. Seaga today is going to be on a wide range of issues as they affect Jamaica in particular and the Caribbean in general. Mr. Edward Seaga, welcome to CaribNation. You've just celebrated, what, 40 years of involvement in Jamaican politics and by extension Caribbean politics. Congratulations, it's a pretty long time. For the benefit of viewers who are not au fait with your career, let's go to the beginning. How did it all get started? What fired your wanting to get involved in politics?
It wasn't a plan, it wasn't a design. I was trained in sociology and anthropology, and I found myself doing research work by actually living in communities in the rural areas, studying the development of the child and studying our indigenous religious cult groups. And that, of course, opened my eyes to the true nature of that other Jamaica, of this dual society, the problems and what I perceive to be the solutions. And so, in order not to just leave this hanging, I wanted a mechanism by which I could at least apply the solutions and speak about the problems. And so I found myself writing on the issues, came to the attention of the Jamaica Labour Party's leader, Sir Alexander Bustamante, and from there was invited to join the party, which I did, and rose very rapidly on the basis of having that particular and peculiar insight into the problems of rural Jamaica and the inner city urban areas, the blighted areas. And when we won in 1962, I was able to begin by serving as Minister of Development, which gave me the opportunity to apply a wide range of sociological and cultural solutions to problems, or to fill needs that arose right after independence. And from there went on to also deal with the economy when I became Minister of Finance in the second 5-year period of that decade. So it was something that I didn't plan. I never studied government, I never studied politics. But here we're not dealing with government and politics, we're dealing with people, which I studied, and which I had the wonderful opportunity of living with people in the folk society of Jamaica and learning about the true Jamaica.
Two major political parties contrasting ideologies, the JLP and the PNP. You were invited by Sir Alexander Bustamante. But was there something about the JLP's philosophy that grabbed you?
Well, from I was a child growing up, I always favored the JLP because I was particularly attracted to Bustamante and to Bustamante's championing of the poor. I have a basically strong feeling for injustice, and to my mind he was seeking economic justice, and that attracted me. But it didn't attract me in the sense that I wanted to be a part of any political movement. That came later, when I went into the field and lived. When I say live, I don't mean going in the morning and come out in the evening, I mean live. And had an opportunity to see the injustice at work, the deprivation and the desperation.
Mm-hmm. When you speak to most Jamaicans and you ask them about Edward Seaga, the first thing they say is that he dealt with the economy. You were known as the economic wizard. Talk a little bit about your economic philosophy. What is it that guided your economic outlook, your economic programs?
Basically, an economy responds to a known system or philosophy or ideology which allows the market to work. the laws of demand and supply. And to the extent that institutions are needed to make the market work, that helps to fill it out. The reward for personal initiative is fundamental to making the market system work. These are all my fundamental beliefs, not in any peculiar sense. There is a very large body of economics that speaks to this. Indeed, that is a body of economics that is popular on a global basis today. But back in the early days, that wasn't necessarily the way to go. And to that extent, one must ensure that you give sufficient hope to those who would invest their savings, because that's where it all starts. You save money, it accumulates, it's available for investment, people invest, the investments produce, and the production provides employment and the economy grows. You must give them the confidence that the rules that are laid out are not going to change drastically, that the goalposts are not going to be moved at convenience. The playing field is level. And I was able to do that. And in the second half of the 1960s, I was able to introduce or to create an indigenous Jamaican banking system. The banks prior to that were all foreign owned, rather akin to what exists today, unfortunately. Yes. An indigenous insurance industry, beginning with Life of Jamaica and the establishment of others that went. Most of them were just arrangements made with the Canadian industries to hand over to Jamaicans. And so from creating a Jamaicanized financial industry, you were able then to move on to using those savings for development of other sectors. And I was heavily involved in establishing merchant banks, the unit trusts, the mortgage bank, virtually all the financial institutions, the stock exchange, etc. So we filled out the whole network in that period of the institutions that would be required to make an economy work. When we took office back in 1980, much of that had collapsed. Had to revive it and to build some additional institutions. But we also had to do something, because in the 1960s, the economy which we were leading was one in which we were giving protection against imports, which is sort of the first step in the market system. You allow your own domestic production to build up. The second step would be to gradually remove that protection, because you assume that your domestic production would have built to a point where it was competitive and it would be able to enter the export market. Well, this wasn't done in the 70s, and so in the 80s we virtually had to start again. But this time we didn't have the luxury of saying, okay, we will continue with the protection against imports. The world was now moving into a liberalization and as a predecessor to today's globalization. And so we had to, at that time, open the markets, begin the liberalization process. This caused a lot of local industries to fall, but it caused a lot of them to adapt. And that process still has not been completed insofar as manufacturing is concerned. There has been a very slow response to changing over. So we had to build new sectors and not rely upon the old sectors. And the first new sector that we built was the export garment manufacturing sector, which was a sector that had an employment of about 5,000 people and less than $10 million in foreign exchange earnings. And we took it up to 35,000 people and over $100 million in foreign exchange. It was a new subsector that we added on. The next step that we made was not something new, but something that had to be done, and that was to increase the tourism sector, because it had virtually come to a point of collapse in the 1970s. And so we added 3,000 new rooms and got the hotels that the government owned ready for divestment. and the industry was once again booming. And the third area was one that wasn't as fully successful, but which has to be done, and that is the modernization of agriculture. We modernized the banana industry, which again was at a point of collapse after 2 successive hurricanes, but also because production was so low it just didn't make sense as an industry. We had to introduce new technology and modernize it totally. The sugar industry, we started the modernization, which is still going on and which is yet to be completed. So agriculture also had to be reformed. And finally, insofar as the economy is concerned, I introduced information technology with the establishment of what was called a digiport in the Montego-Freeport area, which was for data transmission and processing. This was to be the first of many such operations which would have dotted the island and created jobs for 30, 40, 50,000 young people. Unfortunately, that was allowed to lie dormant in the years after we lost, and only last year it came alive again when a new minister virtually discovered that this was in Montego Bay and has now decided to make this an important subsector. So in substance, we pivoted the industry away from the old closed economy to the open economy to make it more competitive. And we built the winners that would help to make the economy grow. And the fruit of the pudding was in the last half of the 1980s. We were able to make the economy grow again at the rate of 5%, create record employment, 100,000 jobs in 3 years, and keep the level of inflation down in single digits and so on. All the indicators were in the right direction by the end of the second half of the 80s, so the recovery was virtually complete.
Yet in 1989 you were voted out of office.
That's correct.
To your mind went wrong?
You have to look at how the voter thinks. Firstly, people tend to think that a good economy is an entitlement that one need not reward any leader for creating. If the economy is bad, they'll blame you. But if it is good, you're not necessarily getting the credit because this is a standard form. But on the other hand, the services that touch them, health services, educational services, and so on, when those are bad, then you get the blame for them. While we were rebuilding the economy in the 1980s, we didn't have the funds to be able to deal with the problems of the social sectors, education and health and so on. The funds just weren't there. What we did was at the end of that period, we created a comprehensive plan, the most comprehensive plan on the social sector that has ever been created, called the Social Wellbeing Program. And we raised, by way of commitment from international donors and from projections of how the economy would behave in the 90s, all the funds necessary to tackle all the problems in all the social sectors. It was a very comprehensive plan. And 5 years of that plan would have transformed the social sector of Jamaica. So that it was in a 1-2 phasing. The first was to enable the economy to be put back on its feet, and then from the buoyancy of the economy to create the proper conditions in the social sector and to modernize it.
Let's go right back to the beginning. 1959 you got involved in politics. 1962 you're elected to Parliament. You become a cabinet minister. You've practically grown up with Jamaica. Jamaica got independence in 1962. Do you think that Jamaica has lived up to the expectations that your generation would have had in 1962 when you became independent?
Absolutely not. This is the title of the presentation I made in my budget speech, not this year, last year. It's called Why Are We Poor? It's a question that we must legitimately ask. This is a country that has a wide range of natural resources in mining, in its natural beauty, in its land, and in its people. Far more than other countries, even within the region. And we're a few hundred miles away from the world's richest marketplace. So why are we poor? This budget speech was based upon a study that was done by 5 professors from Columbia University and our own eminent and late Professor Carl Stone. And they looked at 5 small open economies: Jamaica, Singapore, Hong Kong, Mauritius, and Malta. And they examined them in the 1960s, where they were all virtually at roughly the same stage of development. Today, all those countries are way ahead of us. We are hardly better than we were in the 1960s. And why? Because as a result of inappropriate policies in the 1970s, the gains of the 1960s were wiped out. 20% of our GDP was lost. We had an economy that failed to grow for 8 consecutive years, the only country in the world with that record. In the 1980s, we started out by picking up again, went through the worst recession in 50 years when we nearly lost the bauxite industry in the middle of the decade. And then we had to, by virtue of structurally adjusting the economy, recover, which we did in the second half, and we were back on track. The 1990s has seen a period of stagnation. There's been no growth for the last 10 years. When you take the minimal and marginal growth of the first 5 years and the negative growth of the last 5 years, have cancelled out. There's been no growth. The GDP has not moved in 10 years. Now, what you have in effect is a situation in which you take one step forward in one decade, one step backward in the next decade. One step forward in the third decade, another step backward in the fourth decade. So you're not moving. Now, on that basis, we are left behind, the others have gone ahead. Because in the other countries, they have learned to pick up where an outgoing government has left off, and to build on that. And then when your turn comes to leave government, the gains that you have made are picked up by your successor. And so it's a build-on-build process. Whereas we don't build on build. We build and we tear down, we build and we tear down, we build and we tear down.
What's responsible for that?
The inappropriate policies are the result of the adventures that took place in the 1970s when the country was steered in a total leftist direction. It destroyed the economy in the sense that it moved us away from the market economy. It moved us into a command economy of planning, and one in which populism and state control were the objectives. And on that basis, it was not possible to make an economy work at that time. Today we don't have that. In the 1990s, the election pledge of the People's National Party was continuity of my policies. But there's a big difference between saying something and doing it. And there's a big difference too between saying something and wanting to do it but not knowing how to do it. And that's where we fall now. The present government does not any longer believe in the policies of the 1970s. It publicly declared that socialism is dead. But in saying that they are now practicing the policies of a market economy, does not mean that they can do it, because you don't learn these things. There's a learning curve. You either naturally have the instincts that go with a market economy, or you have grown up with it, as we did from the 40s, or you spend your time learning. And what has happened here is that we are suffering for the learning curve of this government as to how to make a market economy work.
Is there any magic in this market economy?
No. There's no magic in it at all. It's the most natural thing to man. All you have to do is make 2 blades of grass grow where there was one before. And that's the most natural thing to man. Man will dedicate a part of his interests and a part of his objectives in life to aiding his fellow man and aiding his community and aiding his state. But basically, man wants to aid himself and those directly around him, his family, and that's the incentive. And the incentive is the basis of the motivation that leads you to want to invest and produce.
So you are still convinced that the market economy is the answer to the poverty in Jamaica and the Caribbean?
Well, I don't think I have to be convinced. I think the rest of the islands in the Caribbean have already shown the result of that, because they follow the market system. They have been following it, and they haven't fallen prey to the radicalism that we had to experience by way of the adventurism that Michael Manley took us through. And their economies and the strength of their economies show that it works right here in our region, quite apart from Singapore and Malta and Hong Kong and all the others. The rest of the world shows that too.
Mm-hmm. You are also known as one of the most strident anti-communists, especially during the Cold War era. Looking back, do you think that you were somewhat a little bit too harsh on communism as this evil?
No, I want you to get me quite straight on this.
Okay.
I'm not anti-communist.
Uh-huh.
I'm anti-communist for Jamaica.
All right.
There are some countries in which communism has a role to play, probably as a phase in a development spectrum. Mm-hmm. Perhaps it's the only way to make a large, unwieldy population come together in some way to begin the stage of growth. I don't know of any country that has made it work to the extent that it can, in effect, become an engine of growth eventually. It has to be replaced. But for Jamaica, Jamaicans are not inclined to the ideologies that govern communism and radical socialism. State ownership, Jamaicans want personal ownership. The motivation of personal incentive, that's what Jamaicans want, not dedication to the betterment of the state as the first and primary objective. State controls, Jamaicans like freedom. They don't like to be controlled by the state, and so on. And it's just not right for Jamaica. And I would not sit back and watch my country taking down a path that the people themselves would not accept eventually, and that would be wrong for the people. And that is why I fought it, and fought it hard in the 1970s.
As we look towards the future, what role do you see the state playing in the economy here in Jamaica?
The state has to play a regulatory role. It must play a regulatory role. But one of the problems we have in Jamaica is there are regulations, but nobody applies them. Mm-hmm. And we keep adding more and more and more regulation without pausing to ensure that they are applied. So they're not treated seriously. Society continues to be a very freewheeling one without the discipline of regulations. That's the job of the state. The state has no role to play in the economy as a producer, but as a facilitator. And that, if you ask anybody, they will tell you that that is what the government is doing. But of course, doing it at what pace and in what way makes it the difference between whether you're doing it successfully or not.
We'll continue our conversation with Mr. Seaga after this short break. In case you're just joining us, we're talking to the leader of the opposition in Jamaica, Honorable Edward Seaga. Let's move to some Caribbean issues. During the 80s when you were Prime Minister, you did play an important role, and Jamaica in general has always played an important role in the Caribbean integration process over the last 30 years or so. One of the big issues on the Caribbean agenda right now is the Caribbean Court of Appeal. Give our viewers your view on that, because there is some controversy here in Jamaica in terms of how it should be implemented, whether Jamaica should be part of it at all.
We have led the opposition to this from day one.
Mm-hmm.
That's from 1988, I think. We are not convinced that we can divorce the intrusiveness that seems to pervade all aspects of our life, the political intrusiveness in a court that is to have final appellate jurisdiction. The way in which court is structured is that the Chief Justice is to be appointed politically, and then he appoints all the other judges. So you have a Chief Justice who is beholden to the political leaders who appoint him. And as such, the justices that are appointed to empanel the court are also beholden to the Chief Justice who is beholden. Now, the one thing that we must not have is any watering down of the purity of justice. What this country needs, and I can't speak for the rest of the Caribbean, I think some countries in the Caribbean would fall in this category, is more justice, not less justice. And to the extent that we need more justice, we do not want to water down the pure form of justice that we are able to enjoy by appeals to the Privy Council. That has served us well. We have full confidence in it, largely because not only the quality of justice that is there, but because the members of the Privy Council are far removed from local circumstances. We do not want a court that is going to take into account circumstances and conditions of the society in which they operate. We want a court that takes into account two things: the law and the evidence before it.
But how are those divorced from the society in which they're being administered?
The society and the conditions of the society can be dealt with by the legislature. That is the role of the legislature. You pass laws. If something is wrong in certain conditions in the society, the legislature or the executive, through policies, correct those. The court cannot say the evidence shows this, the law says this in support of the evidence, therefore, legally speaking, you are right. But because of certain conditions in the community, we are going to award in favor of the circumstances and conditions. You can't do that. That's not a court.
But the scenario that you're outlining there presupposes a strict and clear separation of powers, as in the United States of America.
No.
It does not.
No.
Okay.
The United States of America has taken separation of powers to an extreme.
All right.
Very good. Suits them. Wouldn't suit us. But the same separation of powers that I'm outlining are the separation of powers of the Westminster system. Mm-hmm. It's just that in the Westminster system it is practiced with integrity. In our system it is not practiced with integrity. And because it's not practiced with integrity, we have to ensure that the systems are tight enough to resist the attacks upon the integrity.
Uh-huh. But the criticism that the Privy Council represents colonialism, how does that sit with you?
I don't quite understand those arguments, because by the day, by the month, by the week, we have ex-colonial masters who are invited here to be consultants. We have ex-colonial masters who are invited here to invest and to operate and to run industries and all other areas of services. We have their involvement fully. And now in a global society, you will have even more of that. The fact of the matter is that if I'm on a plane, 30,000 feet, and the pilot tells me that that plane is in trouble, I don't want to know whether the person there is a countryman or a colonial. I want to know that he's the best pilot.
Okay. I suppose the contradictions of our Caribbean dealing with our colonial past and how it manifests itself in the present points, well taken.
At any rate,
yes.
The Privy Council is no longer a court of English justices. We have our former Chief Justice sits on the court. So do the former Chief Justices of a number of other Commonwealth countries. And it's moving in the direction of becoming more of a Commonwealth body. That's not necessarily just that of the members of the English House of Lords.
Are you satisfied with the pace of Caribbean integration?
Well, you see, when you use the word integration, it is a sort of a buzzword. we have always taken the position that we integrate what serves a common purpose and what is beneficial. But we're not going to integrate systems that really have not proven themselves to be beneficial or really do not have the possibility of being beneficial. For instance, we're not in favor of integrating a political system. We took that decision back in 1961. But we have led the integration movement in the establishment of the Caribbean Development Bank. We have been toe-to-toe all the way through the development of CARIFTA to CARICOM, etc. The university is an excellent institution of integration. So the West Indies cricket team too, and so on. There are many very useful institutions of integration, but there are some that don't make sense, and there is no need for them, and you can over-integrate to the point where you're wasting funds and you're not getting a return on or a benefit comparative to the cost.
There is a case to be made for the whole question of the movement of labor in the Caribbean countries, for example. Are you satisfied that we are moving at the pace that we ought to move in terms of this free transfer of labor across the region?
Well, that's an emotional question, and I can understand the feelings of countries. Back in the 1960s, when that was a part of the question in respect of our determination of remaining within the Federation or not, we were a very thriving economy. And we feared the intrusion of hosts of people from the other islands taking jobs from Jamaicans. It's the other way around now. And other countries now fear people from Jamaica coming in to take jobs from them, particularly since their currencies are far more valuable than ours because of the way in which our economy has deteriorated. So that's one that's going to take time to adjust to. The level of integration that is taking place so far, or has been approved to take place, that is at a professional level. I don't think any country can suffer from the free movement of highly qualified skills, because that's in short supply everywhere.
Let's come back to local politics, and in particular party politics. There's no way one can conduct an interview with Edward Seaga without talking about the leadership of the JLP, which has been in the news now for a number of years and very much in the news recently.
For a decade.
You've 40 years, Minister of Government, opposition leader, Prime Minister, opposition leader again. Don't you think you've had enough and it's time to make way for a new generation?
In a sense, yes. Many times I wish I could allow myself to feel that that was all there was to it. But a leader has a responsibility to ensure that when he moves out, he doesn't leave chaos behind. And I've had a trying 10 years in which, after 1989, when it was the appropriate time for me to have demitted leadership, and I was in my own heart and mind ready to do so because there are other things I want to do. The party was unsettled by a gang of five. It made it impossible for me to try to stabilize it so that a leader could emerge, or 2 or 3 potential leaders could emerge from which the party could make a choice. After we got through that trauma, and there was more or less a feeling that there is at least one person who could be a successor, and we were moving in that direction, that person allowed himself to be persuaded by financial interests and other persons in the society, that he was fully able, ready and capable to move on, and indeed to move out, and indeed to move on independently. And he did so. And so that unsettled the party again. We have come to the time now where I think we have a group of persons who are in the right age group, 50s and 40s. And we even have behind them a younger age group who will form a future generation of leaders. So I feel very satisfied now that from that body one can find a leader. But there are some more unsettling moves at this time. And the one thing that I will not do, because as a leader I must have the responsibility to ensure that my transition to successor is smooth. I will not walk away in the middle of any dissatisfaction or inability of those who are in the leadership level below me to work together. They must satisfy me that they can work together, that they respect the authority of the party, and that they not just respect my authority, because if I am not there, then that is not where you look for your decisions, your justice, your rulings, or your authority. The party is structured in a manner that it has its elements that play different roles and different functions. You must respect that, and you must respect the people who are elected to lead those various segments of the party. When you can do that, then you're functioning properly as a party without a strong leader, because I don't expect another strong leader to emerge, and therefore I want to see that in place before I move on. How long it will take? Maybe not long, maybe a little longer than I expect.
Many of your detractors, some of them who were your colleagues, have said that Edward Seaga is an authoritarian kind of leader. Respond to that criticism.
I don't know what you call authoritarian. If you mean the same people who call me to ask me to speak to somebody else on their behalf, or to settle an issue between them, then it would appear to me that they need somebody who is authoritarian because they're unable to do it. And the fact of the matter is that the Jamaican Labour Party and Jamaican politics as such has grown upon strong leaders. But I myself, over this past decade, have been moving assiduously to the restructuring of the party as the machinery and the system that rules. And I've had to speak to this issue and to advise party members that I am not going to be available for you to bring problems to me. You must take them to the party and deal with them at the party level, because I will undermine the very systems that the party is trying to create. So yes, I'm a strong leader. Whether I'm authoritarian, I don't know what the word really means in that sense, because I'm not undemocratic, far from it. I respect the democratic system, but when the democratic system is put in place, it must be allowed to rule and it must be respected.
The role of political parties in Jamaican society, in particular Caribbean society in general, they've played the major, central, pivotal role in the political process. Do you think that we've suffered from too much of party politics? For example, earlier you talked about government goes out of power, the other government comes in, says it will carry on, doesn't carry on, does its own thing. So, as you say, 2 steps forward, 2 steps forward, 1 step forward, 2 steps backward, that kind of thing. Do you think too much of party politics is responsible?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
This is one of the problems that has riddled the Jamaican society. I cannot speak to other Caribbean countries, but there are at least 2 other Caribbean countries that I say have massive resources, great wealth, but politics has been the reason for them being unable to convert those resources into national wealth. And this is true of Jamaica. And I'm saying so not because they are our opponents, but it is far more evident when the People's National Party is in power, because they come out of a background in which political control was the basic objective of the ideology which they followed. And although they have now rejected the ideology, that part of it is still in them ingrained, that political control is the most important thing. You control every lever of command within the economy, not just the politically elected areas, as is the case here. This is one of the reasons why we do not want to have a Caribbean Court of Appeals, another lever of control. And to the extent that you control the country politically, it is felt then you can do anything that you want after that. And that is basically and fundamentally one of the reasons why we keep having inappropriate policies, wrong policies that are not truly in the interests of the country, but which you can get away with once you control the society politically.
Let's move fast forward somewhat. Elections are due in a couple of years. Obviously, you've started to put things in place for that. Let's talk a little bit about the JLP's vision for the future. Everyone knows your trademark and so forth, but we are in the process of a new era of global politics, local politics, and economics. What's the JLP's vision? Let's start first of all with economy.
This is the subject and the title of this presentation which I made on April 18th for the budget. It says, is there hope? And it questions, is there hope to restore a buoyant economy? Is there hope to revive job creation? Is there hope to curb poverty? Is there hope to overcome ignorance? And is there hope to conquer injustice?
Is there hope?
I went through all of these in that presentation, and I came to the conclusion that there is only one hope, and that is a massive revolution on the state of our educational system. Again, I refer to the other islands in the Caribbean, who enjoy far better states of far better condition in their systems of education. The results show that. I mean, we have appalling situations where children graduate, 50% of the children graduating from primary school cannot read and write. Only 20% of the population are fluently literate. Fluently literate. Another 30% are functionally literate. Now, a society can be built on that. And the lack of equipment and skills that that society can provide makes it impossible for you to have an economy that can generate the jobs that you require. So, to have an education system with those kind of results, to say nothing of the passes in mathematics and English, which go down to as low in some of our secondary level schools, go down to as low as 9% and 10% of those sitting. To have that kind of system is going to affect poverty, it's going to affect crime, because crime breeds on poverty. It's going to affect injustice, because the hardships and the tensions that arise out of poverty and crime create injustice. And I don't mean this in the absolute sense, because there are other things that create injustice too. But the base of the entire revival of the Jamaican economy, or putting it another way, as we enter 21st century, we should be looking at a new century and a new millennium that is full of hope. Instead of that, we are carrying the baggage of the last century, the last decade or decades, the last millennium into this one. We're carrying the ignorance, we're carrying the injustice, we're carrying the poverty, we are carrying the lack of economic buoyancy, etc. We should have had those behind us, and would have, had it not been for this decade of growth, followed by a decade of negative growth, and so on, in which we have stood still for 40 years. To the extent that we are now in a new century, we now have to make a determined effort to get rid of it. And the proposal that I put here is that we must raise the level of expenditure in education to the level that is spent by other countries.
It's about 18% of the...
No, it's 10%.
Okay.
10%.
But that contradicts the government who says it's 18%.
No, there's no such thing as an 18%. They had 1 year, they had 15%. 1 year.
Okay.
Right now, it is back at 10%. And to that extent, we must get it up to 15%, which is the level that we want to be able to provide the funding to have an education revolution. What is that revolution going to do? The revolution is going to ensure that all children leaving primary school, here are your figures, 11%, followed by 15, followed by 13.7, followed by 10.8, followed by 10.8 in this year. It is going to ensure that all children leaving school are literate, not just functionally literate, but in a fluid sense. It is going to ensure that those that go to secondary school, and I've advocated the extension of the period of time in secondary school for 2 more years to take them all to 18, and stop graduating our children at 15 years old, putting them out into the workplace as kids. Take them to 18 years old as industrial societies do, and cramming them with more mathematics and more English. And at that point, you will then be able to raise the output from secondary to tertiary education from 10% to 20%. Then you will create the skills that you need for your society, and indeed a surplus. But it begins with a primary education system. Indeed, it begins below that at the basic school level, in which we must have full enrollment in basic schools. So this whole revolution will cost. And I recommended floating of a bond, interest-free, tax-free bond, which I know will be subscribed to by the pension funds and so on, for the purpose of financing it. But unless we're serious about an education revolution, then the answer to this question, is there hope, is there is no hope.
I have not had an opportunity to look at that.
What's yours?
Thank you very much.
That's yours.
Thank you very much. But let me ask you a question in relation to this, and that has to do with teacher training and teacher preparedness, which is a crucial aspect of the education
All part
process.
of the expansion that we talk about there.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about another big issue here in Jamaica, and that's the question of crime and violence. It seems never to go away. Some people feel that the media and the other elements, non-Jamaican elements, blow it out of proportion. Is this true, or is it a real problem here?
Well, it has to be a problem. The level of murders that we have, which approach between 800 and 1,000 each year, is not something that you can accuse the media of blowing out of proportion, because that is out of proportion. That has ranked us the number 1 or number 2 in the world insofar as murder committed per 1,000 of population. So it is out of proportion. There's no question about that. I was hoping to have shown you a graph which would have in another sense depicted pictorially why that is so. I can only give you half of the graph because I wasn't able to find it at this short notice. This is how the economy has run since the 60s. Up, down in the 70s, up, down in the 90s. The graph that I would have shown you would have also showed you crime doing this, going down as the economy went up, and then going up as the economy went down, and so on. Beautiful. It's almost as if you just did a design. But that is the truth. The United States today is enjoying a wonderful reduction in crime levels, insofar as the statistics show, because this economy is booming. It doesn't need any magic to understand that. And what we are suffering from is a stagnant economy, a deteriorating economy, an economy that is in shambles. And therefore, crime has escalated correspondingly. I'm not saying that if you correct the economy, you get rid of crime. No, but you reduce it. No question about that.
A lot of people have said that the crime in the Jamaican society is somewhat linked to the kind of tribal politics. There is a name that they give to it, garrison politics. Do you agree with that kind of assumption?
Old story. That has passed away over the last 10 years. Passed away. In my own constituency, where we were in one of the most difficult positions, the last report issued by the Police High Command on crime in various regions in the country showed the West Kingston area to have the lowest crime rate of all. And that is because we have had peace politically among the various political factions. It was engineered by myself and my opponent a number of years ago. And since then, people walk anywhere they want. They trade. The site is quite open, play games, have cultural interchanges, and so on. That's not the reasons for crime. Crime is now a matter of desperation. It's a matter of, on the side of the police, overreaction and injustice by extra judicial killings and that sort of thing.
What is it that makes Edward Seaga tick politically?
I don't think I have any big reason. I'm one of those who tick for the little reasons that I get a great satisfaction out of building, creating, developing. It is said that I have had more institutions built than any other politician in the Caribbean, and I get my joy out of that, creating the institutions that are set out in this book in various pages, nearly 100 in total. But not the institution for the institution's sake, because what is that? It is the institution for what it can do for people. Basically, although I have my reputation based in finance, I'm not too overwhelmed by financial achievements. What I'm overwhelmed by and moved by is what you can do with the money and the social institutions that you can create. And in this booklet, which is on my 40th anniversary, you will see the list of institutions that are set out in there, in the social field, the cultural field, in the finance field, of course, in creating infrastructure, and in all the other areas of service that I have given. And to the extent that I can look at a community like the one that I represent, know what I found when I went there, and know what it is now. Work not yet finished, but know that I have made a difference in the lives of so many people. I think that in that respect, my life has been well spent.
If you were to go it all over again, what are some of the things that you did, a couple of things that you did that you would not do this time around, or you would do differently?
I've been asked that question before, and I found difficulty in answering it because everybody makes mistakes. There are little ones and there are big ones. I don't think I made any big ones. Some people said the big one I made was to have rescued the country in 1980. I should have let it go the full route into a Cuban-style communism and then rescue it, and people would always remember that. I rescued it too early. But I don't think I could take that chance, and I don't think that I would consider that an error. But there are lots of little mistakes, things you say, things you do. But basically, I would retread my steps. I would go back through the same routine, but I would have loved to have had a country in which, when I handed over the baton, representing the work that I had done, the man who took it from me could move it on. And when it came back to my time to take it, that I would receive it further ahead, because then the rewards would have been greater. Jamaica really has been very badly treated, very badly treated. We have no reason to be poor. And that is the big dissatisfaction. My fight has been against poverty, ignorance, and injustice. And I don't know how much headway has been made against those things in the last 40 years.
Mr. Edward Seaga, former Prime Minister of Jamaica, now opposition leader, and some would say future Prime Minister of Jamaica. Thank you very much for speaking.
My great pleasure.
With
My great
us.
pleasure. Thank you for a wonderful
It's been something that we've been wanting to do for a very long time. Speak to someone who has helped to shape the history of Jamaica and the Caribbean in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's always my pleasure to interview those who have helped to shape the history of our Caribbean. Mr. Edward Seaga has certainly been one of the most important leaders in the post-colonial Caribbean experience. We hope that you found this interview most instructive. Until the next time, this is David Hinds, thanking you for tuning in to yet another edition of Carib Nation. And remember, as always, our motto here is one people, one culture, one Caribbean, one nation.